What do you think is the most masculine sport?
Boys basketball.
Okay, why?
Because apparently they do push-ups after practice and they yell a lot in the hallways.
UFC,
Why?
because they beat each other.
Thank you.
Probably like MMA or boxing. You use the most aggression for it, definitely.
Football.
Football.
Probably like football.
Football as well.
Football, because people hit each other. I guess that's toxic masculinity, but whatever.
They wear like shoulder pads and they make them look bigger, and they run and they're all strong and get concussions.
You need to be super strong and thick and tall just to be able to play.
A lot of tackling and just testosterone in general.
A lot of like really big dudes running around chucking things.
I would guess it's sort of related to how the thick padding makes it appear like you have somewhat more muscles than players actually do.
It has a lot of like anger and physical aggression associated with it, which I feel like sometimes people associate with masculinity.
Because there's not like a girls' league professionally, but I feel like most other sports have their counterpart.
There actually is a professional women's football league, but they essentially wear bikinis, so that's a whole other issue.
What do you think is the most masculine sport? Just off the top of your head.
American football.
Why?
Because people are smashing the heck into each other.
Football or basketball. They're the most gritty and they're like very contact sports. They fall into that stereotype.
I would say football because of like the team bonding and like the aggressive sort of notion within the sport, and the fact that there's like a lot of wrestling and like physical contact and sort of like this notion of dominance involved with the sport.
Football.
Oh yeah, football.
Why?
Because like there's no NFL for girls, you know? It's just kind of males. Also seems like something, I don't know, very male, like, ooh, you know.
I agree.
I enjoy playing, watching, and talking about a wide variety of sports. The vast majority of my peers participate in our school's athletic programs, and I've made most of my closest friends through the teams that I've been on. But there is a cycle of toxic masculinity in many sports. It's important to note the distinction between masculinity and toxic masculinity. One definition of toxic masculinity that I like is from Cambridge Dictionary. Cambridge defines toxic masculinity as ideas about the way that men should behave that are seen as harmful. For example, the idea that men should not cry or admit weakness. In Bell Hook's words, masculinity, or feminist masculinity, presupposes that it is enough for males to be to have value, that they do not have to do, to perform, to be affirmed and loved. Rather than defining strength as power over, feminist masculinity defines strength as one's capacity to be responsible for self and others. In other words, masculinity is not performing an act to satisfy societal expectations of strength and power. Unfortunately, toxic masculinity is very much embedded in American sports culture. Many famous athletes in popular sports, such as football and basketball, perpetuate aggression, misogyny, and a lack of vulnerability. To further understand male sports culture, I interviewed 3 of my guy friends.
Can you first introduce yourself with your name and your sporting history?
I am Orlando Scheil. I was in soccer freshman year at UHS, cross country sophomore year and freshman year until I got injured, and I've been doing track all 4 years.
My name is Dash Nakahata. I played ice hockey for 10 to 11 years. It's somewhere between those 2 ranges. And for the past 4 years, I've been running cross country and track here at UHS.
Hi, I'm Michael. I'm a senior, and I played soccer for like 10 years outside of UHS, although I wasn't really good, and I didn't have that much fun playing UHS, so I kind of stopped. And I played badminton at UHS for 4 years. I did swimming before that for like 4 or 5 years.
So what do you think is the most masculine sport, and what's your rationale?
Football. I think it's just a heavily contact sport, so I think that's just associated with masculinity a lot. The other answer was water polo. I feel like water polo takes a lot of consciousness of being intact with your masculinity.
What do you, like being confident in your masculinity?
Because I feel like a lot of people are like, ew, shirtless with my other friends in the water, kind of weird. And then, I don't know, they're just very conscious about it. And in that way, I feel like it's also very masculine for that reason.
On the note of water polo and wearing Speedos, kind of similarly for swimming.
Yeah.
Like Michael Phelps, who is incredibly physically and mentally strong, but I feel like he's not necessarily the first person that comes to mind when you think of the most masculine professional athletes, and maybe that has to do with the attire that you wear.
I've always felt like masculinity lacked an intellectual side to it at times.
Physical toughness is very closely associated with masculinity, as we've seen in my peers' various answers to my initial interview question. And one thing that intrigued me was how mental strength plays into masculinity. One thing that comes to mind in particular is cross country, because running is a mental sport. It requires self-discipline, motivation, and drive. Moreover, running is often used as a punishment for other sports, and yet it's not necessarily the first sport to come to mind when you think of manly, strong sports. So why is it that mental toughness is not seen to be as masculine as physical toughness?
I feel like that's something that that's why they sort of like poke at cross country and that sport for being less masculine, because there's less to see about someone who does cross country. Masculinity lacks object permanence.
So flag football is kind of the closest sport that we have to American football, which is what the general UHS population tends to think is the most masculine sport.
Yeah.
And so while there's arguably less contact in flag football than there is in like basketball, the team dynamic is, from the outside, it appears to be very like macho bro culture. Whereas the badminton team is on the opposite end of the spectrum. There's no contact. And I think it just has more of a reputation as less of a masculine sport.
In my junior year, it was much more so like that. It feels like that's changed, not for the worse. Many people at UHS, particularly girls, had like negative responses to the men's or the boys flag football team being called like the men's football team, which is understandable in the sense that like it's obviously not like the right name for it. There definitely was a tangible change that was introduced to the team the next year because of that, I think. Like, it just felt like a less like of a macho culture. Mm-hmm. But also on the team, it felt like there was like less passion in general to win. In comparison to badminton, I mean, in general, you're just going to have like less masculine energy if you have less guys on the team.
Do you think that intense competition can exist even without macho culture?
I mean, yeah, of course. I don't think they're like one organism. I just think that one can lead to the other.
So you've played on co-ed teams and all boys teams. So how have you noticed the culture to differ between the two?
With guys, it's more of it feels more like energetic. Like it feels more like get out there, like let's go beat them, stuff like that, which is really fun. But that is the culture. And on the other hand, you have badminton, which is also really fun, but it's more of like, let's do this, let's win the game. Rather than beat them, it's like more like, let's win. One feels more competitive, one feels more like building as a team.
The soccer team was a very masculine sort of environment compared to cross country, which was a co-ed sport. So in freshman year, going from fall season cross country to winter season soccer was a really big change because everyone talked differently. I left midway through and I feel like that wasn't something that I wanted to go back to because I just got so used to the co-ed sports and stuff. In terms of self-esteem, it's like in the soccer team especially, it was sort of like a moment of you need to match up with them in order to be friends with them. And that was something I just didn't enjoy, so I just left and joined strength and conditioning.
Do you think that sports have had a net positive or a negative impact on your mental health?
I'd say a positive. Track, I always feel like is a positive because I'm always just with a group of people that enjoy the same events as me and also just really enjoy the sport for what it is.
Do you think that there should be more conversations about toxic masculinity, and do you think that sports are a good place to start? Mm-hmm. Because I think there can be a lot of misconceptions around what toxic masculinity is, and I think that sports are definitely a place where, so I'm kind of answering the question, but I think that sports are definitely a place where toxic masculinity can manifest and grow into a real problem that extends beyond the sports realm.
The idea of toxic masculinity and to a certain degree misogyny is really culturally built into the sport because it's the same guys who played 20 years ago are now coaching, and it just rolls over and over. So I would definitely say so.
Yeah, I definitely think that it's an important thing to talk about, especially within sports. But the problem is when you talk to an entire team, there's like shoulder talk basically. So although it's hard, I feel like the best mechanism is to talk to someone like one-on-one about it, because in that case they have no one to turn to sort of like make laugh, and because in that way they're not really taking in the information.
I think sports can have a very negative impact, especially on young boys, in that it can be like an echo chamber, like locker room talk of sexism, like just being compounded by all these guys in one space together. But at the same time, it can also be really positive in terms of instilling determination and grit and connection with your teammates. You've played two sports that are pretty much on the opposite ends of the spectrum. How did the team culture shift between the two teams?
Running at UHS, it's not just about running, it's also about the school and the community itself. So hockey is much more of a brutal sport physically. Checking is allowed in hockey, and cross country is not a contact sport. I will definitely say that, like, locker room talk, like, you know, there's gross stuff that's said in the locker room, as in, especially at the age at which I played up until COVID, which is, you know, at the end of our freshman year. Locker room talk varied between different teams, as in what was acceptable. For example, like San Francisco versus Stockton, the locker room talk is different.
Do you think that like locker room talk has affected your views on masculinity?
Yeah, I would say so. I would say it's like, well, I wouldn't just say it's just because I went from a co-ed sport to that sport, but just in general, it was just kind of awkward to hear it talking such, like, I don't know, just like being sexist in such a casual way. And I think it's like that sort of anonymity that you're given and sort of allows that different side to come up more.
Are you saying that in groups, like on the soccer team, boys felt more comfortable being casually misogynistic because they were in a group and so it felt safer?
Yeah, or it was just like, for example, like in a heterosexual relationship, it's like the boyfriend is like different around his girlfriend. And like with his friends probably is like more casual, more sexist, I guess. I don't know. The most I felt I could do was like laugh at their jokes, but then I felt like I couldn't participate in anything because I didn't believe in the words that they were saying. And so, yeah, that's kind of why I left. I was like, I can't really like sustain myself in this sort of like friend group or these kind of people. So I just, yeah.
Between teams with boys versus girls on them, I tend to think that the guys would watch themselves a little bit, like watch what they said a tiny bit more on co-ed teams. You would understand what humor was okay and what wasn't, simply by other guys getting yelled at by the girls on the team. There is a higher level of freedom when guys are talking on non-co-ed teams because they're not worried about what their teammates will think. I won't lie. Playing hockey in some regards gave me a very toxic masculine mindset in that slurs were very much okay to use. Especially at that age, you want to fit in with the rest of your team and you feel that they might not accept you in the same way if you don't join in the same types of what I'm going to call banter, although it wasn't that funny. I'd like to think that I've changed a good amount since those days, but trash talking is a massive thing in hockey.
Dash was not alone in his experiences with locker room talk, and unfortunately, what is said in the locker room goes beyond the locker room.
When you told me the whole story, I felt like throwing up.
And going beyond slurs, a more extreme example is Donald Trump bragging about sexual assault. Now, Trump supporters shouldn't exactly be used as the benchmark for intellect and what is acceptable, but this clip speaks for itself.
I think it's just locker room talk. That really, what does that mean? Guys in the bar talk that way when they see a pretty girl. What are you going to say?
I've heard worse about men talking about girls, women, so. It's locker room talk. That's what boys do. He didn't do it.
Well, I don't talk like that.
Well.
At what age did you become aware of phrases like you run or you throw or you play like a girl?
Oh, probably around like 7th grade.
Do you think that influenced you?
Maybe subconsciously. I think that they're problematic. It appeals to societal standards that women are weaker than men in terms of sports.
I was not fast freshman year. That was a humbling experience. He would consistently kick my ass in every type and any distance. The phrase "you run like a girl" is like a particularly stupid one because it makes, like, nowadays it makes me think, oh, well, God, they're probably faster than me, so the hell am I going to do about it?
Are there professional athletes that you believe are good role models for healthy masculinity?
Realistic.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I mean, I think for me at least, I just noticed that, like, you can tell when, like, certain people are like overly masculine. So I think, like, the lack of that, or like when you're not intentionally trying to be that, then I think it's just fine. I think it's easier to notice, like, the bad role models than the good role models, because, like, the good role models are just people that just, like, play their sport, they do well, they succeed, they, like, boost up their teammates. They're not necessarily, like, putting others down for the sake of competition. I know Conor McGregor, who's, like, a professional boxer, he, like, talks a lot of to his opponents, and he's good, but that's kind of like a toxic, even if it's enjoyable to watch, it's kind of like a toxic like atmosphere that he creates.
Another big part of masculinity, from my experience and my point of view, societally at least, is the conveying of emotions, whether that be to try to be as stoic as possible, or when emotions come out, it's not grief or sadness or anything that will show vulnerability for yourself, but emotions like happiness or anger or things that seem like you're fine and all right in the world are going to be more accepted, I guess.
Yeah. Being male is seemingly synonymous with suppressing your emotions, and the list of circumstances under which it is socially acceptable for men to cry is extremely limited. In my experiences, the three situations are extreme pain, witnessing death, and sports. But even then, there are rules. You can cry if your team wins, such as Neymar Jr. after scoring the final penalty kick at the Rio Olympics, and you can cry if you lose, but only if you're not personally responsible for it. According to AskMen.com, Tim Tebow, after losing the 2009 SEC championships, is fine, but not Roger Federer after blowing the Australian Open that same year. Can you think of a time when something other than sports made you cry?
Hachi, Toy Story 4, getting my first C, falling down the stairs.
Okay.
Hachi was a super sad movie.
My grandpa died in first grade. There was also the condition that, like, I cry, I don't know if I want to say differently, but in a very specific way, as in, when I cry, it's usually not a ton of noise, but just tears, and I think I've made the effort to try not to be that loud when I cry, especially since I'm the older sibling among me and my brother. I mean, I'll admit to this, I don't want him to see me in such a vulnerable state, in the sense that I'm supposed to be the stronger one.
And why is that? And why is crying so, like, indicative of weakness?
It's how I'm societally conditioned, is what I will say. To me, crying shouldn't be indicative of weakness, but it often feels like it is to me.
What do you wish that masculinity meant?
But it feels like masculinity is associated with, like, misogyny and sexism and stuff like that, and I wish that could be separated, because I feel like you have, like, very prominent figures such as Andrew Tate, and he gets kind of, like, labeled as masculine, and I wish that wouldn't happen, because I feel like is invalidating. Like, he should be labeled as, like, sexist and misogynistic, but masculinity should be kind of, like, disassociated from that. I experience societal messages, like, telling me to be masculine, right? But then at the same time, if, like, people like Andrew Tate are being called masculine, and I don't want to be like Andrew Tate, then what am I supposed to do? I wish there was some way to separate, like, the societal definition, like, the literal definition of masculinity from misogyny and sexism. I don't know if that's possible, but that's what
I don't think one set of words will define masculinity. Masculinity is going to mean different things to different people, and how you wish to define it is up to you, but as long as you're comfortable and it's a healthy way to define it, that'd be all right with me.
What, should I, like, run up to them? Can I ask you guys a question for a video real quick? Yeah? Okay, yeah. What do you think is the most masculine sport?
Men's varsity flag football.
Okay.
Varsity badminton.
Okay, why?
I mean, you just look at the people on the team. Do you not find incredibly masculine and attractive?
Oh my god, can you not say this?
Okay, what about you?
Why did I say varsity badminton?
Yeah.
Because Michael Mooney is on varsity badminton.
Thank you.